And what an honor to be asked by the Wholeness Network to participate today in this workshop on oneness. Oneness. Now just take a deep breath and presence. What does that mean to you personally? What does it mean, oneness? You can close your eyes if you want. Oneness, what does that mean? Now we're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to cover a lot of ground on oneness with self, oneness in relationships, and oneness with what I call the divine, or whatever you may presence as your higher power. And that's going to be the step. Now, this is not something I learned from a textbook or from a, series of workshops or anything like that. This is something that has come to me through the life experience. Life is my school, experience is my teacher, and then the results of all that seem to be the vibration that I carry. Because one thing we'll get in touch with today, and that is that we are the creators of our own existence. We are at choice for our own experience. And we're simply here to learn. When I say here, in this realm. Now, one thing as you breathe in and think of oneness, presence the reality that you have always existed. You are without beginning, you're without end. You have always existed. And this is simply where you are right now. This is where you are right now. Now, life is an interesting school. I mean, you think about this. Many times I've had people tell me that in this world, we are getting nowhere. Do you feel that sometimes, like you're just pushing up against a wall? You're getting nowhere. I look at humanity, it's like, gosh, when are we going to learn? When are we going to ever begin to embrace oneness? And what would that look like? We're getting nowhere. Let me remind you, if you just look at this a little bit differently, we're now here. We are now here, present, in this moment. And now is all that exists. History's gone. We don't know what might happen 10 minutes from now. But we have this sacred right now. Right now. And within that right now, there's a beautiful, beautiful choice. So just put everything down. Put things on the floor. And those of you that are joining us remotely, you can put everything down. Put both your feet on the floor. Just sit and breathe for a minute. And presence now here. You're now here. And thank you for coming. Thank you for spending the time and for caring about yourself enough to say, I deserve this. I'm going to step in here for me. And take a big deep breath and just fill your whole body with air. Just beyond your lungs, right down into your belly and your legs and your feet and your hands. Just fill your whole body with air and then breathe that out. And let's do that again, and this time I invite you to breathe it in as light. Literally visualize light coming into your whole body, your whole being, filling your whole chest, your belly, your legs, your shoulders, your arms, your hands, your feet. Just feel that energy going right through your body, and then exhale it. And as you exhale it out as pure divine love. Inhaling light, exhaling love, and realizing that that's a gift. That in that beautiful right now, you can breathe all you want. Might be the only thing in this world I know that's free. You can breathe all the air you want and fill the body and celebrate being alive. Being alive. And what it means to be alive. Now, the premise and foundation of everything we're going to cover today is based on something that happened to me over 20 years ago. I've come to know what's called a near-death experience. And the cause of that for me was a horrific automobile accident. And I know there's familiar faces and people that know the story, but I want to set the foundation for where much of this comes from. I was with my whole family, driving a car on a family vacation, a road trip. And I lost control of the car. There was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a pickup truck driving erratically on the interstate. One of the most difficult parts of this story is, to my recollection, I may have just dozed off, just for a moment, just dozed off. But in doing so, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and the car began to roll not off the road, but down the road at 70 plus miles per hour. It was a horrific automobile accident. Now, I blacked out for most of the accident, but when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious, and I heard, first of all, my 7-year-old son crying in the back seat. And my thought was, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. That's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or to the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid smell of gasoline. There was all the broken glass. But I could not move. Now, I was not aware of my injuries in that moment. But what had actually happened is both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. I wear a prosthetic limb to wander about. My back had been broken. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and the seatbelt had cut through me and ruptured all my intestines. In fact, it had ripped me open so badly, my femoral artery was exposed, but by some miracle was not cut. My back in L4 and L5 had been cracked, but by some miraculous thing, my spinal column had not been damaged. I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is my son was crying. I had to get to my son, and I couldn't move. But that's when I also realized that no one else was crying. And it took years before I could really even talk about this. But in that moment, I knew my wife, Tamara, was gone. She was napping. She had laid her seat back. And because of the way she'd reclined her seat, the seatbelt had not restrained her properly, and she suffered some pretty severe head trauma, which took her life. Our two boys were in the back seat, and as I say, Spencer, my 7-year-old, was crying, but Griffin, our little toddler, he was only 14 months old. I realized that what had happened is his car seat had broken apart, and he had been ejected from the car. I mean, as a father, it's like, where's my little boy? And it's almost like Spirit just told me, he's gone. Which in some ways was a relief. Oh, okay, he's not suffering somewhere. But on the other hand, what a blow. You know, my precious little boy gone. This was the worst hell a man could ever be in. Half the family has passed. I've got a hysterical 7-year-old in the back seat. I can't move, and I'm losing consciousness. And that's when this incredible near-death experience began to happen. I don't know if it's ever ended yet. You know, it seems like the doors open and sometimes they don't close. But in that darkest, most miserable moment of my life, light came. And I don't words are difficult sometimes, but light came and light swirled around me and light surrounded me. It's like I was in a bubble of light, and the light seemed to be comforting me in this horrific moment. And it felt as if I was rising above the scene of the accident. And then within that light appeared Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, and I knew what had taken her life, and yet there she was. And she was absolutely gorgeous. She was radiant. She was beautiful. She looked better than she'd ever looked. It wasn't like Sixth Sense, where souls carry their injuries that took their life. She was absolutely magnificent. And we began to communicate. And she was emphatic, you got to go back, you got to go back. You can't be here. You've got to go back. And we had this conversation about Spencer, my 7-year-old son. If I left, he would be orphaned. Now, in that moment, in that now here, which was profound, I learned a lot about choice. Because there I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And I seemed to be free from all the chaos that had happened in the accident. But I knew I had a little 7-year-old boy in the backseat of that car. And I made a choice. I made a choice to come back. And in doing so, I found myself wandering around a hospital. When I say wandering around, just moving about. Now, I have no concept of time in this bubble of light. I later found out what happened. People arrived on the scene. They were able to get Spencer taken care of. One particular person was a doctor. He actually knew how to take care of the scene. He was a professional, a very enlightened man. He's become a dear friend of mine. 2 doctors at this time became dear friends of mine. I was extricated from the car, and because of my injuries, I had to be life-flighted to a level 1 trauma center. I had no concept of that. All I knew was I'd wrecked the car. I had said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And then I found myself moving about the hospital, seeing the doctors, the patients, the nurses, the families of the patients. But boy, was I seeing them. I knew everything about them. I knew their love, their hate, their joy, their motivations. I knew everything about them. I was connected to them. This is what I now refer to as the oneness. I experienced this absolute connection. And it didn't matter what they had done or what they hadn't done, I loved them. There was this profound, unconditional love. Until I came upon a body laying there that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was odd, and that's when I stepped forward and took a closer look and realized, oh my goodness, that's me. That was not me. I was having this profound connected experience, but that was my body. That was the skin suit that I'd been going through this realm within. And as I looked at that, I had a profound experience. I was incredibly saddened at the state of my body. It was a mess. And there was also a divine like a realization, like, wow, I never realized what a miracle my body was. You know, I didn't have to tell my eyes how to see. I didn't have to remind my heart to beat. I didn't have to tell my lungs to breathe. I didn't have to tell my feet how to walk. Like, there was intelligence in every single cell, and I had taken that for granted my whole life. In fact, I had this profound download that my body literally was a temple. It literally was a temple, and that in this realm, any holy place I might think I'm going into was symbolic of me entering my body to receive a gift, to receive enlightenment, to receive an awakening by life, by that beautiful teacher of life. So there I was looking at it, and again had to make the choice to get back in, which I didn't have to figure out. It was simply the intention. I'm going back in. You know, it wasn't like, okay, how do I lay down and get back in there? We have no idea how powerful our thoughts are, our intentions. I'm doing this. I'm being that. And in making the choice, boom, I was back in the body. but back to the pain, the grief, the guilt, the trauma. You know, I was ventilated. There was a big tube down my throat doing the breathing for my lungs. My legs were immobile. My right arm was immobile. Eventually, my left hand was tied down, so I didn't grab at all the medical equipment. And I learned a great deal about being still. I had no choice. But I was also reflecting on that oneness. What was that I felt? What was this thing that when I left my body, I was more alive than I'd ever been? What was this thing with Tamara, this communication and this absolute connection to nurses and doctors that I felt like were strangers in this realm, but boy, did I ever know them, and was I ever connected to them. And it was a profound experience. That was the basis. That was perhaps the beginning of a journey of, wow, where do I go with this? Now, I spent many hours laying in that hospital bed asking why. Why me? You know, why them? Why both of them? Why the injuries? If I have to survive this, why? It wasn't until I stepped into a different question. And I want you to think about this a little bit too. A different question, what? Shifting from why to what? What am I learning? What am I being? What can I bring because of it? What can I take away from it? Asking why was a dead-end road. There was no why answers. And the hospital was a very profound thing. Now, as we focus this morning on oneness with self, I want to talk about that a little bit because I realized what the self was. It was my body. That was a profound part of it, but there was something far bigger than my body. There was something far, more divine perhaps than just my body. There was this consciousness that I was outside of the body, and there was this connection that I had to everything within that. And that's something that we can just hold. Consciousness and connection. I call them the two C's, consciousness and connection. Where is my consciousness? You know, where am I vibrating at? Do I want to play that right-wrong game? Do I want to judge everybody I see? Do I want to judge myself in harsh ways and let that voice in my head tell me things that I would never say to somebody else? And what's my connection? Not only to my body and the people around me and the earth and the sky, but what's my connection to that divine realm, that higher vibration? So be with that for a minute. Consciousness and connection. And we're going to move into a few things today. I wanted to set some house rules. I only have 2 house rules. My 2 house rules are be honest and be kind. But I want to talk about these a little bit. Can everyone see the board okay? Am I standing in front of you? Be honest. There's a word in the middle of there. Can you all read that? One. If you look at the root of honest and what that looks like, to be honest is to be one with what is. To be one in that now here, to be at peace in that here now. And to be honest, not only with yourself, but with others. And this is something I'll ask from everyone today as we go into this, is that you are honest. I've had an interesting experience with honesty. When I've been honest, I've found that the energy is absolutely undeniable. Even when I'm placing judgments on something I've done or something I haven't done, when I'm honest, it seems to bring about more connection, and it seems to bring about more consciousness. Sometimes the person we deserve to be the most honest with is ourselves. Being honest with me. Where am I really? What is it I really want? What are my motivations really? And those are very interesting questions you can ask. What do I want? What am I being? And what does that do to me and those people around me? Honesty. Be honest. The other one is to be kind. There's also a word in the middle of that one. I found to be kind, you got to be all in. You got to be all in. I mean, there's no holding back. It's to be all in. And I found many circumstances in my life where it's like, wow, am I being kind or am I being honest? You know, do I look fat in these pants, right? I'll promise you this. The most kind thing you can be is honest. Because the result of being honest and kind is trust. Is trust. I had a very wise man tell me one time, it's better to be trusted than loved. He then said, fortunately, you're both. And I'll tell you, this is my prize possession in my life, is to be trusted. And if you've ever broken a trust, and I have, that's what crushes my soul. But when I can be honest about it and be kind about it, the trust reemerges. And there's a word in the middle of trust too. Us. Us. Oneness. Togetherness. Connection. Right? So, what do you make of all this? You know, a near-death experience, wow, I left the body, then got back in it. Well, I realized I wasn't my body, and I had profound experiences that went far beyond that in the hospital. I mentioned the door sometimes doesn't always shut. Tamara, my wife who had passed, seemed to be present almost all the time. In fact, I met another doctor in this circumstance, not the one that was at the scene of the accident, but the one that was in the room I was life-flighted into. When I arrived at the Level 1 Trauma Center, this doctor was attending. He wasn't even responsible for my care. There was a team of 5 surgeons or something that were going to be working on me for hours in that trauma room, but he had been informed of what was happening, that there was a life flight coming in, that there had been a fatality at the scene of the accident, and he has shared with me that they want to know all that because that tells them the velocity of the crash. They can begin to assess, you know, maybe what they can expect when the patient arrives. And he was in that mode. You know, he knew the crew was going to take care of it, but he knew what had happened. And as he shares it, he was going about his duties, and one of the nurses that was in the trauma room, that was assigned to that trauma team, came up and got him and said, you've got to come down to the trauma room. And he said, why? And as he shared it with me, he said, she's there. And he's like, she's there? What do you mean? And she said, his wife's there. Well, this doc came down to the trauma room, and he shared this in his book called Not Yet, but he sees the team of surgeons working over my lifeless body. And he said, standing above my body, he sees the spirit of Tamra. He sees her there. But he puts it in a way of he's seeing not with his physical eyes, but he saw her. And he seemed to be aware of everything around him as well. Now, there's probably a miracle that he ever shared that with me. He didn't know me from Adam. I didn't know him. He was just the attending ER physician in the level 1 trauma center I was life flighted or airlifted to. But by a strange turn of events, he ended up months after sharing what he had seen. He didn't know I had had an out-of-body or near-death experience. He knew none of that. But something, including the nurse, I think she was the one that may have dragged him in and said, we've got to go tell that guy what we experienced. Very enlightened nurse. He shared his experience with me, and we became dear friends too. I have no doctor before my name. I have no MD after my name. I have no credentials. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a certified this, that, or anything. Life has been my teacher, and I embrace that. Now, I've studied many, many, many things. You know, I have gotten certifications. I had one particular nurse that would come in the hospital, and she would even stay after hours. She would say, can I do some work on you? I mean, is she going to take my blood again? You know, what is she going to do, right? She would come and just hold on to my foot. Or sometimes she might put her hand on my chest. I came to know she was practicing something called Reiki. I knew nothing about it, but I knew how I felt when she did it. And that was profound. That was interesting. When I got well enough, I looked into Reiki. I looked into reconnective healing. I looked into matrix energetics. I looked into cranial sacral therapy. I was starving for wow, what is this? What is this energy? Well, what I've come to the conclusion of is energy is everything. And everything is energy. Even our intention. It's all energy. It all flows. In fact, I've learned that emotion is energy in motion. Everything's energy. See, I grew up in a home, and I love my father, but boy, he was a cowboy and a soldier, and you didn't show your emotions. You know, real men don't cry. Buck up, cowboy, get back on, keep going, which was very useful in my healing. I have an incredible family. You know, my brothers, I was a middle child. My brothers practically lost their jobs to come in the hospital and sit with me and be with me. And my mother would come in, and my mother and father had divorced. They divorced when I was very young. We're going to get to that in a minute. And my mother would come and she would talk to me. I remember listening to my mother pray over me. She thought I was unconscious. I, for all intents and purposes, was, but I was aware of everything that was going on in the room. And I would hear her plead for her son. My dad would come in and he wouldn't say much, but he would just sit and hold the space. He would just sit and look at me. And real men don't cry. But I saw tears in his eyes. One of the most profound moments was my big brother. With the injuries to my abdomen, and we'll talk about this when we get into relationships, they had to pack my abdominal cavity with gauze every day, and then they would strip it out. It was part of the healing. They had to strip all the infection out. And it was gross. There was a time in the hospital, I was asking my mother, what stinks in this room? And she said, it's you. I was literally, there was gangrene is what took the left leg, this open abdominal wound and the infections. At one point, the nurses got so sick one day trying to pack and deal with these abdominal wounds that the one nurse got sick and she was throwing up, and then the other one got sick and she had to leave. And my big brother said, I'll do it. He was a trained EMT. Tough guy, right? Law enforcement officer, first responder. He's done it all. But he came and started packing my wounds. And his hands were not near as small nor as gentle as was the nurse's. And oh, it hurt. And I'm wincing, and he's talking to me like a man talks to a man about, lay still, knock it off, you know, you big wimp. And I'm thinking, why is he so mean, you know? Why is he so mean to me? The divorce happened when I was like 4 years old. And he, in many ways, became the protector of me. He was 3 years older than me. Still is. He's going to turn 60 this year, and he's a full-time firefighter, still passing all the physical restrictions and everything. But he's packing these wounds and telling me to quiet down. And I happened to look up at him, and through his tough words, there was a tear running down his face. You know, as he packed the gut of his little brother. And I'll tell a story in our relationships process of being one in relationships that brought this to great light as to what a gentle man is and what brotherly love really means. But hold on to those things. Now, the divorce. Let's talk about that. Oneness with self. Boy, the divorce. Anybody here been through divorce? As a child, as a spouse, wow. Okay, I'm just looking here in the room. I would say 95% have been through divorce either as a child or a spouse. I was 4 when mom and dad split up. And it was pretty traumatic. My memory was being behind the couch, crying, hiding, because they had had this big fight. They didn't fight brutally. There was no violence in the home. But they were splitting up. And everything I thought was good, true, and forever was not, suddenly. And I remember the night Mom left and packed us kids in the car and drove away. And that was pretty scary. Now, oneness with self. This is where I'm getting honest about myself. What that broke open in me was that the world couldn't be trusted, you know, that I certainly wasn't enough because this wouldn't happen if I was a good boy. And also that relationships couldn't work. You know, gosh, that was mom and dad. Now, I'll honor my mom and dad. They were great as divorced parents. Their co-parenting was impeccable. You know, my dad would drive for an hour to see a Little League baseball game, you know, and to be there. And my mother was incredible. You know, as basically the breadwinner and the, you know, the caregiver and anything a single parent goes through. But what I decided about myself in that moment is that I wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough. And that I'd never make it. And that no matter what I did, I would never measure up. And it's crazy. I had a weird Band-Aid I would put on all that insecurity. And I'll call it insecurity. I was insecure. Many times I still am insecure. But the Band-Aid I put on that was overachieving. Gosh, let's make the team. Let's make the grade. Let's get the girl. Let's get the job. Let's get the car. Let's get the house. Let's do all of these things. Do. Measure up, measure up, measure up. Win, 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 win. Compete, 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 compete. Gosh, my brothers, you know, I mean, men, we do this. We compete. We got to beat the other guy. You know, look what's happening in the world right now, particularly our country. We tend to pick sides and we got to beat the other person. It's a competition all the time. We're right, they're wrong, we must win. Boy, what that's done in humanity. A little later on, we're going to get into some indigenous practices. But boy, what humanity has done to humanity. Hey, we're right, they're wrong. Let's drive them out, let's kill them off, let's take away the food source. Let's crush a people in their culture because we're right and they're wrong. That's the game that oneness will stop. Those insecurities that must measure up, must win, must go, 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 go. That was actually my motivating force. And what I realized going into life is that that had become who I was. And this is not to discount Tamra, but the beautiful woman on my arm, the healthy children, the job, the house, the car, the success, right? Measuring it in monetary means, putting on that front that everything's perfect here. And we did have a beautiful relationship and a happy family. But what no one knew is that I was that scared little boy. How will I ever measure up? How will I ever be enough? How will I ever accomplish enough that I'm okay? And maybe you've played that game in your life. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Has anyone here heard of a mesa? A few. Let me undo this mesa. I want to show you this. This is something quite special and quite sacred to me, actually. And I was introduced to this several years ago. Can everyone see this if I just put it out front here? What's the meaning of mesa? What does mesa mean in Spanish?
Table.
A table. It's an elevated place. What my mesa holds is 13 stones. And I was introduced to this by a dear shaman. And I'll undo this. You know, there's a shamanic practice, a shamanic ceremony, a shamanic tradition, which is called dismembering. And it's literally the undoing of everything that you are, or everything that you think you are. And I've seen different ceremonies for that. You know, everything from being eaten by lions, not literally, but symbolically, to literally take apart all these false beliefs we have about who we are. Now, it's interesting in my experience because literally everything was taken apart. And when I say literally, everything I thought I was, oh, I'm the Division I athlete. Well, now I can't even get up the stairs without limping, right? Oh, I had this beautiful family. Well, half of them passed. And I had a 7-year-old that lost everything I lost. His mother, his little brother, even lost his father. And I was driving the car. I learned a lot about guilt, too. I was driving the car. I played that in my mind time after time after time after time. In the shamanic dismembering, there's also a soul retrieval, a soul rebuilding. And my mesa and my process was very much about rebuilding that soul, bringing back those pieces of me. Now, my mesa is wrapped in a cloth which has the 4 sacred directions on it. And this has been around a little while. I have carried my mesa with me. It's been in the Arizona sun and the Utah snow and many places around the world. And within it are stones. I always add to the mesa what I call my pie stone. And I don't know if you can see that. Some people call them donut stones, pie stones. You know, I mentioned early on that we are without beginning and without end. So's that circle. I've talked about the oneness. That hole in the middle represents the oneness of everything that is. The oneness of everything there is. I'll call out a few of these stones. This is one I call my at-one-ment stone, my atonement stone, the light and the dark. You know, if I reflect on life, and I'm sure you can do the same, there's things I've done that I would change, perhaps. But that's my ego speaking. Because if I really look at it, I'm who I am because of everything that's happened, not in spite of it. Every single thing in life is a gift. All the things I put judgments on, the good, the bad, playing that right-wrong game, that's just my ego, that's just my judgments of it. In reality, it's in divine order. Everything is at one. I just get to realize it and recognize it. When I wrote my first book, in the final chapter, I talked about two stones that I picked up at the scene of the accident. My accident happened at mile marker 80, northbound on I-15. It's a little spot just outside of Parowan. It's an old native town. And I went back to the scene of the accident. It took almost 10 years to get back there. Not because I totally avoided it, but I'd never gone back there with any intention. And when I went back, a decade after the accident, contemplating all that had happened, I found two stones. Now this little stone, and I don't know if you've ever picked up rocks. Have you ever picked up rocks and felt the energy in them? Boy, is this one energetic. Boy, is this one mischievous. Boy, is this one filled with light. This is just like my little boy Griffin who passed. This reminded me of him. It carries that energy right from the scene of the accident. It's rough, kind of dirty. Everything a little boy would be, right? This one is smooth. And it's a little lighter. This one carries so much love. So much acceptance, so much vision. Gosh, it's a lot like Tamra. So I picked up these two stones. That was a retrieval of pieces that I wanted in my life, in my mesa. This one was given to me by my current wife, Tanya. I eventually remarried after the accident. Boy, the unconditional love of that one. And the responsibility, the integrity. We'll talk about that when we get to our next section in relationships. But what a beautiful stone. Tanya and I adopted 2 boys. Beautiful sons. They're grown men now. Keep in mind, the accident was over 20 years ago. And this one represents my boys to me. There's layers, but it represents all the men in my family. All the men. All those that have gone before, all those that are here now, and all those that will come after. Generations. This is a gathering. This is a gathering of the pieces. The bringing things back together. And each of these 13 stones has an incredible, significant, personal, spiritual meaning to me. And yet, the whole point in this mesa is for me to gather my soul together so that I can somewhere in wholeness and oneness offer something back to humanity. It's really not about me in the end. But if I'm going to give something back, I must be whole. I must be at one. I must be at peace. And yet, the reason I share these things is very rarely do we heal others without showing our own wounds. And we all have them. We all have them. It's that honesty, that courage to bear them, to talk about them. You know, there's a Old Testament story. I'm a Bible reader, and I love the Old Testament story of Moses. Moses and his tribe out in the wilderness. And you know, they had snakes out in the desert. And it says the fiery snakes were biting them. They were biting them and people were dying. They were dying from these snake bites. Almost sounds like a virus, doesn't it? These fiery snakes are biting people. Moses went to his higher power. What do I do? What's my contribution? How in wholeness can I contribute something to the people I love? And this inspiration came. Gosh, make something that looks like one of those fiery snakes and lift it up on a big stick, lift it up on a big staff. Have everybody look at it. If they look at it, they will be healed. It's that easy? Yeah. If they look at it, they'll be healed. So Moses did that. It's almost like gathering stones and bringing your soul back into alignment. Well, I'll make a snake and put it up on a stick and hold it up where everybody can see it. And the people who looked at it were miraculously healed. So says the Old Testament. I see deep symbolisms in that. We all have fiery snakes that are biting us in the butt all the time, right? And if we're honest, boy, what are those snakes that bite me? What are those things that keep coming up? What are those things I keep thinking or I keep doing or I keep being? What are those fiery snakes that are the voices in my head telling me lies about who I am or who someone else is or who I'm not, mostly? If we lift those up on a big stick and look at them, they will be healed. To me, that's all those deep, dark secrets. That's those fiery snakes or those deep, dark secrets that I don't want anybody to know. Gosh, if they knew that about me, what would they think? When you bring them out in the light and you put it up on a staff and everybody looks at it, suddenly it's like, oh, wow, I've had that snake in my life too. Oh, wow, I admire your courage for being willing to bring that snake out and letting us look and heal it. Even society, those deep, dark, fiery serpents that bite us, whether that's sexism, racism, you know, gosh, it goes on and on. Human trafficking. Again, what humanity has done to humanity. And oftentimes in the name of being right. Well, let's get those things out and look at them and heal them and put all those fiery snakes to bed. There's deep, deep symbolisms to all of that I won't even go into, but I love that one. Let's look at them. Let's take out those things about us and look at it. Presence within yourself. What are my snakes? What are those fiery serpents that are biting me? And what can I do to come to terms with them? Come to terms with them.